how to build hip and core strength with the bridge march. Unleash your power, achieve your potential. I'm John Calarco, Holistic Health and Performance Coach. If you have weak glutes, hamstrings, hip flexor muscles, or core muscles on the front or the back side, or if you have a pelvis that's excessively tilted forward like this, we call that an anterior pelvic tilt, and maybe that's causing overextension in your lower spine, then the bridge march is going to be a great exercise for you because it's going to help you start to build the fundamental levels of stability and strength in your hip muscles and your core muscles, which is going to help you improve the posture of your lower body. It's going to help you get the pelvis under you into more of a neutral position and get the lower spine back into a neutral position and out of that overextended position. This is also a great exercise because of the reasons I just mentioned to help you prevent lower back pain and hip pain, and can often be used as an exercise to help you start to rehabilitate lower back and hip pain. Now, the bridge march is a progression from the glute bridge exercise, which I showed you in a previous video. The bridge march is quite a bit harder, and now we're not only going to be strengthening the muscles on the back side of the body, the glutes and hamstrings, or the back side of the hip, we're also going to be strengthening the hip flexors, as you'll see, as we're marching at the top of that glute bridge position. Now, the glute bridges in general, both of these are foundational progressions that are going to help you build your hip hinge movement pattern. Essentially, doing bridges are just a hip hinge laying on your back on the ground. So it's a great way to get the patterning down for the hip hinge and develop the strength for the hip hinge. Now, what is the hip hinge? It's taking our feet about hip width apart. It's hinging our hips, just as the name says, straight back, maintaining a nice neutral spine position as if we're gonna go pick something up, all right? It becomes our deadlift if we need to bend the knees a little more to reach whatever object it is that we're trying to deadlift up off of the floor. All right, so again, this is going to be a really important exercise for you to develop the fundamental levels of mobility and stability to do that hip hinge pattern, which is one of the 7 fundamental human movement patterns the right way, and becomes those very important exercises of the RDL and the deadlift. All right, now the primary muscles, as I already mentioned, that we're going to be working are going to be the glute muscles, okay, because the glutes extend the hip or push it behind the body. All right, when we're in the hip hinge or the glute bridge, our hip extension looks like that. The hamstrings do the same exact function as the glutes there as one of their primary functions. So we're going to be using the hamstrings as we drive out as well. And then as you'll see at the top position, when we're doing the marches, we're going to be flexing the hip, doing hip flexion, which is going to train the hip flexors. All right. And then of course, we're going to be stabilizing hard through our abdominals and even lower back muscles to make sure we maintain that perfect neutral spine. All right. So to set up for the bridge march exercise, you're going to come onto the ground, laying onto your back, all right, relaxing the head and neck on the ground, taking the arms to your sides and relaxing those as well. Then, to set our feet in the right position for the glute bridge or for the glute bridge march, what we're gonna do is take the knees up over the hips, get the knees bent to about 90 degrees, and then from there, simply place the heels straight down. That's one of the best ways to find the right position of the distance between your heels and your hips that you wanna have, so that we're getting a nice even activation and challenge through the glutes and the hamstrings, okay? So once we get set there, as you see already, my toes are pulled up towards my shins. That's gonna help me drive the movement more through my heels, which is gonna help me drive it more, again, through my muscles in the back of my hips, which is really one of the main areas we wanna target here, all right? Not to mention we're getting some bonus strength work in the lower leg muscles on the front side of those shins there as we keep the ankles pulled up, all right? So once you're in the setup position, we're going to execute the movement by exhaling. All right, that's going to get our abdominals really activated nice and help us pull and shorten the distance between our pelvis and our rib cage, really get those abdominals firing up. So we're going to exhale as we drive up through the heels, fully contract the glutes at the top, and then I'll show you the march here as we get up there. All right, so I'm going to initiate by exhaling, driving my heels. Then I'm going to march, just as the name says, driving my knee up as far as I can towards my chest and not letting my hips drop. All right, so that's 1 rep. So I'll show you a few reps here so you can get a good visual on this exercise. Again, exhaling, engaging the abdominals, full contraction of the glutes before you go anywhere and start trying to do the march. All right, and then coming back down. I'll show you one more here, exhaling, driving through those heels. Keep those knees, hips, and shoulders in alignment in a straight line here at the top, so we're not dropping the hips at all. Okay, so that's the bridge march exercise. Now, as I've mentioned, you're gonna feel that exercise in the glutes, in the hamstring significantly on that bottom leg, specifically the leg that's staying down as we do hip extension. You'll feel those hip flexors really working as you try to drive the knees up towards the chest as much as you can. So that's not only going to strengthen our hip flexors, it's going to improve our mobility through our hips too, as we're practicing active hip extension through the bottom leg and active hip flexion through the top leg. That's really what gait is all about. That's what great walking and running is about, being able to extend one hip really well and then flex the other hip really well on the opposite side. So again, this movement has so many different benefits, and it's going to carry over to gait as well. Now, of course, we're going to feel the abdominals and the lower back muscles stabilizing quite a bit. If you're exhaling, really fully breathing there and stabilizing that core, hopefully we should feel 75% of it in the abdominals, but it's okay to feel the lower back muscles working a little bit. They're definitely stabilizing as we do this exercise. Now, really important, the mistakes that we don't want to make here as we perform this exercise. When we come to the top position, all right, if you're exhaling properly and you're squeezing the glutes, chances are you're not going to overextend the lower back. But that big major mistake here of extending the lower back has the opportunity to happen when we start driving the knee. So if you lose that awareness and this happens, all right, that's a problem. We don't want to be an overextension. We want to keep that full hip extension. All right, so as you march, make sure you don't allow that overextension in the lower back to happen. And as well at the top, all right, and this second mistake will actually kind of prevent the first one at the same time, is don't let those hips drop, okay? So keep those hips up. Do not, as you march and take one leg off, don't let those hips sink. All right, that's gonna, again, give you more of a tendency to arch the lower back, and we're just gonna be losing the tension through the glutes and hamstrings and missing the benefits of the exercise, all right? Then, lastly, in terms of the feet position, I showed you how to set that up in the beginning of the setup here, but if you feel like maybe you haven't found the right spot, generally, the heel about a foot length away from the butt is the right spot. All right, just make sure you're not too far. That's a mistake we don't want to make. That's going to get you more hamstring work and not so much in the glutes as we want. And then you don't want to be super close. You don't want to try to bring your heels as close as possible to your butt. That's another mistake, because oftentimes that will get us work in the quads, and we don't want to feel the quad muscles here as we're doing that bridge. Okay, so make sure that you avoid those common mistakes as you do the bridge march. Now, in terms of sets and reps for this exercise, whenever we're building fundamental stability, which is really based on building endurance and stabilizing muscles, we want to do a little bit more repetitions. So 2 to 3 sets of about 10 to 15 reps on this is a great way to practice this exercise and develop that endurance. Now, another thing you can do here within those sets and reps is you can actually progress this movement a little bit, and you can keep the hips up the entire time. So I showed you how to do it by bridging up and down, and I like that best because it, again, we're grooving the hip hinge pattern by doing that up and down motion. All right, so again, it's our hip hinge laying on the ground. But if you want to do a more advanced variation, you can just keep the hips up the entire time, right? So I'm going through, my marches there. Now, one march on each side. Now that's 1 rep, and you stay up the whole time. Okay, so you can do that as well for your 2 or 3 sets of 10 to 15 if it starts to maybe feel a little easy going up and down and kind of getting that rest in between. Then another way you can progress this exercise even further is putting a mini band on around the feet. So as you can already imagine, I'm sure, that's going to provide us much more of a challenge as we go through the hip flexion portion, or that march portion, right? So once we get to the top of our bridge and we do our march, all right, that's going to put some significant resistance onto the hip flexors as we do that march in the top position. Okay, so that's another great way that you can do the bridge march and progress it even further to make it more challenging. All right, so that's how we perform this exercise for sets and reps. In terms of how often you should do it, typically we want to do it about 2 to 3 times a week as we're at this level of function and strength in our hips. So 2 to 3 times a week is going to help us build that strength to progress on to more challenging variations, more true single leg variations. All right, this exercise essentially is preparing us for the single leg bridge as we're getting that single leg hold at the top position here when we're flexing that opposite knee. So we're starting to build the foundations for the single leg bridge, which is really, honestly, maybe not the best way, but one of the absolute best ways to develop the glutes through the single leg bridge, because we're really able to isolate one side at a time, which is often the best way to train the body, as so much of what we do in real life in sports is on one leg. So think about doing it 2 to 3 times per week. And then in terms of timing, after your mobility routine, before your workout is really, maybe the best time to do it. That would be the #1 recommendation from me here, because once we build some fundamental mobility and flexibility in our hips, and in our body in general, but specifically in our hips, as I've shown you in previous videos and many different exercises like the half kneeling hip flexor stretch, the band assisted hamstring stretch, the 90-90 hip mobility, really any lower body mobility drill, this is gonna stack stability right on top of that and really allow you to start to carry over that improved movement and range of motion into your actual movement patterns and developing strength on top of those improved range of motions. All right, so that's a great time to do it. Another great time is after your workouts if you want to throw it in, kind of burn out the glutes a little bit. Maybe you want to do 20 reps or something like that. Maybe you want to throw it into a core circuit. It fits really well there as an exercise that's working more of our hips in a core circuit. So it's a great one that fits in really well there as well. All right, so if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below for me. I'd be happy to answer those for you. If you like this video, if you enjoyed it, go ahead and hit the like button and make sure that you subscribe, hit the notification bell. As I mentioned, I have many more videos coming your way in this series specifically about how to build the fundamental level of strength in your hips and your core to build your fundamental movement patterns of the hip hinge, which is going to progress into your squat. So this is really one of the exercises in the series of developing the fundamental levels of mobility, stability that you need to be able to do the hip hinge pattern, which becomes your deadlift later. So make sure that you stay tuned. And until then, unleash your power, achieve your potential.